Hayley emerged from the uptown bathroom with a pale face, a staggering gait, and a dark stain of blood on her dress that would have terrified anyone who saw her, but she didn't scream, call an ambulance, or rush to the hospital like any normal woman in such a dire situation would have done. Instead, she looked around, caught the panicked gaze of Danny, the only other person present, and quickly raised her hand to signal not to come near. The fear in Hayley's eyes wasn't that of someone who had just miscarried, but that of someone afraid of being caught. She kept backing away, avoiding any contact despite Danny's pleas for help. There was no hospital, no doctor, no calls to family or friends. Instead, a man appeared, unfamiliar to Danny, but not entirely unfamiliar to the audience. Randy, who had been lurking in the shadows of dubious situations. This time, he introduced himself as Sammy, a clear move of someone hiding their identity, or at least trying to hide part of the truth. This strange situation raises a series of questions. Why did Hayley choose to trust a stranger instead of her best friend? Why did she try to hide it instead of handling the situation in the usual way? And most importantly, if this was a real miscarriage, what was it that kept her from letting Danny witness it? The answer can be found in the act of avoidance itself and the character of Sammy, or rather Randy, who was not a random passerby, but a cog in the elaborate plot that Hayley was building. If she was really not pregnant, then the entire drama, from the slow gait, the fake nausea, to the bleeding moment in the bathroom, was carefully calculated. And if that's the case, the miscarriage was just the end of a long-term plan to gain something from those around her, be it pity, commitment, or forgiveness. Hayley's ability to stage everything is no longer a vague assumption. Her choice not to go to the hospital is a crucial piece of evidence. A hospital would not be able to confirm a pregnancy that never existed, nor would it be able to find any medical evidence if it was all fake. To anyone else, faking a pregnancy might seem far-fetched and impossible, but to Hayley, who is always in control of her emotions, calculating her every move, and knows how people think and feel, it was entirely possible. She had fooled Danny, and possibly others close to her, of the most sacred thing a woman can bear, new life. And if it was fake, then what was her purpose? Randy, or Sammy, was more than just an unwilling actor in this deception. He could be a secret lover, someone Hayley once knew in the shadows and now called back to complete the final act. Or he could be a professional actor hired for the right role at the right time and paid handsomely to pose as a savior in a staged emergency. Which of those two possibilities is true remains to be seen. But one thing is certain. Randy did not happen to be in Uptown at the time of Hayley's miscarriage. No one happens to show up at the right moment, under the right identity, and ready to help in exactly the right way. The only coincidences in Hayley's world are the ones she wants people to believe are coincidences. Assuming that the entire pregnancy was a long-running lie, we have to work backwards to find the motive. Hayley may have lied to keep someone, to hold on to a failing relationship, or to avoid responsibility for other wrongdoings by creating an emotional shell that softens the heart. A child, even a mere word, is a difficult thing to anger, difficult to doubt, and even easy to forgive. Hayley may have been on the verge of being rejected by Danny, turned away by the community, or losing some advantage in the brutal power play she was playing. And like a cunning fox, she created an emotional lever too strong to be dismissed. The question remains, why choose the miscarriage method rather than prolonging the deception? It was a necessary step to end the story before it reached a stage where it could no longer be hidden, such as when an ultrasound was impossible, when the stomach remained flat for months, or when someone demanded a medical examination. A shock, an accident, a bloody ache, accompanied by an unknown witness, all were calculated to close the story without anyone rational enough to suspect. Hayley didn't just fool one person. She fooled them all, and with a cold, terrifying sophistication, she did it with a look of vulnerability, as if she were the victim. That was the fatal blow, making others not only believe, but feel guilty for daring to doubt. If Randy was, after all, the only piece of the puzzle that knew the whole truth, then his use of a false name was also a way of protecting himself. He didn't want to be implicated if the truth came out. He could have been paid to keep quiet, or he could simply be part of a parallel life for Hayley. A life that no one in Uptown or even Danny has ever touched. Another life where Hayley is someone else, with different relationships, different plots, and untold truths. And if Randy is an ex-lover, then his presence in this incident is not a coincidence, but a hidden reunion, as if Hayley wants not just to end one story, but to open a new one under her absolute control. The question remains, why choose the miscarriage method rather than prolonging the deception? It was a necessary step to end the story before it reached a stage where it could no longer be hidden, such as when an ultrasound was impossible, when the stomach remained flat for months, or when someone demanded a medical examination. A shock, an accident, a bloody ache, accompanied by an unknown witness, all were calculated to close the story without anyone rational enough to suspect. Hayley didn't just fool one person. She fooled them all, and with a cold, terrifying sophistication, she did it with a look of vulnerability, as if she were the victim. That was the fatal blow, making others not only believe, but feel guilty for daring to doubt. If Randy was, after all, the only piece of the puzzle that knew the whole truth, then his use of a false name was also a way of protecting himself. He didn't want to be implicated if the truth came out. He may have been paid to keep quiet, or he may simply be part of a parallel life that Hayley has lived, a life that no one in Uptown, or even Danny, has ever touched. Another life, where Hayley is someone else, with different relationships, different plots, and truths that have never been told. And if Randy is an ex, then his presence in this incident is not a coincidence, but a hidden reunion, as if Hayley wants not only to end one story, but also to open a new one under her absolute control. It is only a matter of time before Danny realizes the truth. And when that truth is revealed, everything around Hayley will collapse or be adjusted exactly the way she wants. Because if there is anything more terrifying than a lie, it is a lie so perfectly crafted that the person being deceived continues to believe it even after the truth has been revealed. Hayley, perhaps, is an artist of deception, one who doesn't need blood to hurt, doesn't need truth to make people believe, and doesn't need real pregnancy to create losses that make the world cry. As Hayley begins to enter the crucial stage of her carefully calculated drama, the supposed miscarriage that she believes is the perfect ending to her days of lies elsewhere, Ashley and Naomi are unwittingly entering the dangerous realm of truth. The conversation between the two women is not about exposing anyone, but rather about concern, about a quiet suspicion that grows over time. Naomi, with her keen intuition and personal experience enough to know when something isn't right, asks a question. That question forces Ashley to stand on a thin line between professional principles and human ethics. As a nurse, she knew the consequences of revealing personal medical information, especially under the strict HIPAA framework, but she also knew that silence could be a way to perpetuate a lie that could harm others. And so, the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. Naomi, who seemed like an outsider, had an important piece in her possession: the ultrasound images her father said he had received from Hayley. But Naomi had witnessed Hayley's refusal to attend the ultrasound that day, a seemingly insignificant detail that now seemed like a major hole in Hayley's story. How could there be ultrasound images if the exam never happened? And if there were, why didn't Hayley give them to Danny, the person who was always by her side and the person she trusted the most at the time? The contradictions began to emerge. Ashley, who had silently observed and remembered, had another piece of the puzzle: the theory that Danny had shared in her despair after that fateful day, that Hayley was faking her pregnancy. First, Ashley didn't believe it. She thought Danny was reacting emotionally, hurt to the point of doubting reality. But standing before Naomi, in the calm and logical eyes of that girl, Ashley realized, maybe Danny was right. Two women in two different roles. One a medical professional, the other the daughter of the person Hayley had manipulated with fake ultrasound images, now became reluctant allies in the search for the truth. Without any declarations, without any grand plans, just with small questions and an invisible connection between intuition and facts, they gradually pieced together everything. From Hayley's avoidance of official medical appointments, to her creating highly emotional situations to avoid suspicion. The ultrasound images had no names, no dates, no health system data attached. A detail that might not have bothered the average person, but was a big red flag for a nurse like Ashley. She knew that any legitimate ultrasound image had to be accompanied by basic patient information. What Hayley presented was just a black and white photocopied printout, something that could have been downloaded from the internet or copied from someone else's file. The question now was no longer whether Hayley was lying, but whether they could prove it before she took the next step and hurt someone even more deeply. And worse, they needed to act before Bill, Naomi's father, and someone who had been emotionally manipulated by Hayley, began to question her. Because if Bill suspected Hayley before the truth was systematically laid out, she could turn the tables, using her emotions to turn everyone around, making herself the victim and the doubters the villain. For someone as skilled at controlling her image and her narrative as Hayley, time was not only of the essence, it was also a weapon. Ashley and Naomi understood this. They knew that half-hearted action would only frustrate the entire plan. They couldn't just walk up to Danny and say, "We believe you're right." They needed proof, or at least a chain of logic so solid that it couldn't be refuted. They need access to medical records, confirmation from the hospital that Hayley was never pregnant, or that the ultrasound never happened. And if that's not possible, they need to find a way to force Hayley to repeat her lie in front of witnesses, so that when the conflict arises, the truth will come out. But like walking a tightrope, one wrong move and Hayley could turn everything upside down, shatter Danny's trust, manipulate Bill's emotions, and continue the painful role she's invested too much in to give up. And so Ashley and Naomi entered a dangerous game, a game they could not afford to fail. Because if they failed, not only would Danny be the one to fall, but they would also be seen as the ones who had unjustly destroyed a woman who had supposedly just lost her unborn child. It was too high a price to pay. But the truth was never easy, and sometimes, to protect someone, you had to confront a lie wrapped in pity. Hayley was entering a period of extreme danger, but also one that she believed would bring her the most benefit. The post-birth period, or more accurately, the post-miscarriage period, which had never happened. She sat leaning back on the sofa, her face pale, her hand on her belly as if trying to comfort herself. But in reality, every movement, every look, every breath was carefully calculated to maintain the image of a woman who had just gone through the shock of losing a child. Meanwhile, Bill, a man full of love, warm-hearted and always feeling responsible to protect the women around him, still has no doubts. He only knows that his wife is weak, in pain, and needs him. And Hayley understands that emotional connection very well. She manipulates it with a fragile appearance, with silence mixed with tears, and with enough truths that no one dares to question further. However, what Hayley cannot expect is that Naomi, intelligent, sober and not controlled by emotions, has proactively sought her out. And this time there is no longer a vague suspicion. Naomi confronts her directly, asking why Hayley gave her the ultrasound images when she had never had that ultrasound. But the moment the truth almost appeared was also the moment Bill stepped in. And for someone like Hayley, every second is an opportunity to turn the situation around. She was instantly weak. Her eyes were watery. Her hands were shaking. And Naomi's name immediately became an intruder on the rest of a recovering patient. In the face of this emotional turmoil, Bill stepped back, genuinely worried, but at the same time a seed of doubt began to be planted. Because despite loving Hayley, Bill could not help but be confused by the unclear chain of events. How could Hayley have returned home so quickly after a miscarriage? Why had no doctor called to inform him? Why were there no hospital bills, no prescriptions, no postpartum follow-up appointments? A cautious person like Bill, even though his heart was drawn to Hayley, would have started looking for missing links. And to keep the illusion alive, Hayley was forced to act first. The doubts could no longer be extinguished with tears this time. She needed paperwork. She needed medical evidence to fend off the increasingly pointed questions. And so Hayley took another step into the darkness of deception. Maybe she had someone else create the fake papers, an imaging technician who owed her money in the past, a hospital administrator she had saved from a scandal, or simply a secret relationship Hayley had maintained for such purposes. Or maybe she did it herself, using her own ingenuity and care. A few hours with a personal computer, graphic software, some sample files from the internet, and a good enough laser printer. The ultrasound images would be printed on standard photo paper, stamped with a fake stamp, and accompanied by a treatment certificate with an unfamiliar doctor's name, an unreachable phone number, and the address of a small hospital far from the city, one that no one had the patience to verify. But there was another, more subtle and cold possibility. Hayley might have approached a real pregnant woman at the hospital, a young, lonely woman with no family, who didn't want to keep her baby, or who was looking to sell information for cash. She might have given Hayley a copy of her ultrasound, along with her pregnancy information, all of which were just paper without anyone checking. But to Hayley, it was a gateway to Bill's complete trust. A few bills, a secret meeting in the hospital parking lot, a few promises never to contact her again, and that was it. Hayley now had a complete dossier to hold everyone's trust. But as with all good lies, the problem wasn't the technique, it was the timing. Sooner or later, the overlap of facts would put Hayley on the defensive. One day, Bill would try calling the hospital, asking to speak to the attending physician. A real nurse would have looked at the records and realized there was no patient named Hayley with a lost pregnancy. A medical acquaintance of Naomi's would have found discrepancies in the paperwork. Or worse, Danny, who was already hurting from the deception, would have found an excuse to go back to the hospital that day, check the history, and when Hayley's name wasn't in the system, everything would have come crashing down. But Hayley wasn't the type to think too far ahead. Or she had. But she believed she could figure it out before she was discovered. She believed that if she kept Bill in her emotional circle long enough, with the sparkling eyes, the soft touches, the nights of pretending to have nightmares about the child is gone, he would never notice details like the appointment date, the case number, or the doctor's name. But she had underestimated the people around her. Naomi wasn't easily swayed by emotions. Ashley knew too much about hospital procedures to be fooled by fake seals. And Danny, though hurt, was still rational enough not to believe in contradictions. Hayley had gone too far. From a small lie at first, she had to build a whole world of illusions to maintain trust. But the more pieces there were, the more likely they were to fall apart. And when the outer shell of her story began to crack, the people who loved and trusted her the most would turn their backs on her the coldest. Because nothing is more cruel than love betrayed by the most clever lies. Bill has never been a suspicious person. He doesn't need to be a nitpicker or a controller to feel the pain of the woman he loves. He can be convinced by a sincere tear, can be softened by a bewildered look. And Hayley has always known that. She understands how he sees the world, how he trusts what his heart tells him, and she has used the best in him to build a safe emotional circle around herself. But the irony of kindness is, when it is damaged by lies, sanity becomes sharper than reason. And Bill, slowly, is realizing the cracks that are opening in that emotional shell, cracks that at first are just vague intuitions. But then day by day, every little detail that he once ignored now comes back like shards of glass cutting into reason. He remembered the moment he returned home from that long meeting. Hayley was already sitting on the sofa, her eyes red, her body limp, wrapped in a thin blanket, telling the heartbreaking story of her dead pregnancy. He didn't doubt it. She said she had been taken to a small clinic where there was no phone signal, so she couldn't call him, where she was temporarily cared for and then asked to go home because she couldn't stand the hospital space. He listened, and he believed, because his heart was filled with only pity. But a few days later, when he needed to order a prescription for painkillers for her, something made him look up the hospital number she had mentioned. Although Hayley had clearly named the hospital, he called back on another shift, and this time spoke directly to the dispatcher, who confirmed that no such patient had been admitted during that time frame. A chill ran down his spine like a gust of wind through a seemingly closed room. Bill didn't say anything. He didn't immediately question it, nor did he get angry. Instead, he began to observe. Over the next few days, he noticed the medical papers Hayley had left on the table. The prints were blurry, without authentic QR codes. The doctor's name sounded strange. The hospital's designation didn't match the official format. He had been a donor to a community health organization. He knew how hospitals worked, and he also knew that no records should appear in such a hasty, inaccurate manner. Hayley would occasionally show up with a stomachache, complain of fatigue, and ask him to buy medicine. But the prescriptions were handwritten, without batch numbers, without prescription dates. Every little thing that had once been a sign of pain now became a warning of the sophisticated deception he was slowly entering. Worse, when he gently asked about the doctor who had treated him, the one Hayley had mentioned a few days earlier, she said he had just changed jobs and was no longer working at the hospital. When he asked to contact her to thank her, she became agitated, saying she didn't want to talk about it, that the injury was too fresh, and that any questions hurt her. But Bill knew the real thing. He knew how people who were really hurting reacted differently than those who were acting. There was a clumsiness, a pause in real emotion. Hayley's was smooth to the point of coldness. Every second she spoke, her eyes seemed to be reading a script inside her head. There was no emotional conflict, no real instability. Just the image of someone trying to maintain a perfect role. Bill began to check the dates. He wrote down the timeline. The day Hayley said she had a checkup, the day she had a miscarriage, the time she left the house, the time he was there or not. And the more he wrote, the more it seemed wrong. There was a gap, from the time she left the bathroom in Uptown until she got home, with no witnesses. No one had seen her at the hospital. No one had dropped her off. Her car hadn't moved for hours. He remembered that she had no bandage, no distinctive smell of antiseptic. There was only a small bloodstain on her pants, and that could have been faked. Every single thing, every single piece, every little detail played over and over in Bill's mind like a model being assembled. And at the center of it was Hayley, the woman he thought he knew, the woman he had loved, cared for, and protected all this time. And then his greatest fear took shape. That his love had been taken advantage of, that his sincere heart had been manipulated, that the beautiful memories were just pieces of a script someone had written. He hadn't told anyone. He hadn't shared it with Naomi, nor had he told Danny, because he didn't dare believe in that hypothesis. But the feeling in his heart was no longer vague doubt. It was a cold disappointment that was gradually forming into anger. And if it exploded, if he forced Hayley to tell him everything, would she continue to lie or would she collapse completely? A man like Bill, when in love, he could give everything. But once trust was betrayed, he would also be unforgiving. And Hayley, no matter how smart, no matter how calculating, could not live forever in a fabricated story whose protagonist was starting to turn another page. A page that she no longer controlled.